A mock-up of a conversation view graph. It's based on a Sankey diagram, and the idea is to review conversation logs, but also be able to respond to them. So this is an aggregation of various conversations around a kind of cannot print kind of IT support question. For each of these nodes in the conversation, we have different clusters, and the cluster is identified on the left with a bunch of example questions that were put in that cluster, and additionally some kind of important keywords that were identified. So these can be entities or other terms that are frequently used to comprise that cluster. We can see the relative priority, but that's also a way of just getting a kind of a snapshot sense of the cluster without having to read through lots and lots of examples. So if we look at one of these conversations, for example, from the entry point, we would come in, and roughly proportionally, these are the number of people with this particular issue. And the conversation would then have a follow-up. So, for example, a user comes in and says, my printer doesn't work, cannot print, nothing is coming out of the printer. The follow-up questions could be, or according to the logs, previous transcripts could be, what printer, how is it connected, does the printer have ink? And we can identify those conversations over here. So I can look at different historical conversations from these little nodules on the top here, and we can trace through and see the individual conversations. Now, in real time, this conversation tool could also be used to, if there were actual users who had come to this point in the conversation, which is what this kind of animation is meant to simulate in the background, is real users coming through the conversation flow. It's not quite fully implemented yet, but the idea would be there's a couple of users sitting at this particular question, and then we can review their conversation logs from that particular question. How did they get here? My printer's working. Let me see if I can help you. How's it connected? It's on Wi-Fi. Does the print have enough ink? And at this point, there may be other answers that you could drop in to those questions simply by clicking on them. Or, of course, you could add a completely new answer here, and then that should get added into this graph as an additional option. So let's look a little bit further down here. We can see how many steps these various answers took until a resolution. So if I come down to, actually it's rerouting back to the end of the conversation here, we can look at one of these conversations and the users that actually came through that thread, and let's say we can then analyze the path that was taken to get to this node. So one of the important things is you can arrive at the end of the conversation having hit similar nodes but through a different path. So there could be different ways of actually getting to that effectively same end node, which is what the graph represents. So this was the path that led to that resolution, and we can score those different conversations as we want. So it's basically a combination of a log analysis along with a built-in option to either make choices and give single responses, or to extend the conversation by adding new responses in real time. And you could just send that, and that would be sent and added to the conversation log.